Thank you guys so much for joining us. This is the first official episode of Where Nerds Play, the new podcast that's going to be featured on my YouTube channel, Snapkeep Videos. I am joined with my wonderful co-host, CJ.
What's up? I'm CJ. I'm joined by my wonderful co-host, Pastor.
What's going on,
I
man?
thought we were going to introduce ourselves, but that's cool.
Sorry, I just kind of went with it.
You're good.
But yeah, so basically we are going to be talking about a predetermined subject that I am very excited about because I think it's a very popular subject in the world or the realm of the nerd community, and we each have our own thoughts on the subject, and that subject is...
Top 10 Marvel Cinematic movies.
That's right.
Marvel Cinematic Universe movies.
Yes. So
Wait,
I think,
so this isn't unique to us?
no, it
This
definitely
is popular in the nerd community?
Yeah.
I thought, I was the only one.
No.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So basically, what we decided to do to begin the episode is to show or to talk about which our favorite, as far as like the teams go, who our favorite participant is. I'm butchering this. Let me start over. So we're going to start off by saying which team we fall on. The infamous Civil War that we all know. It's not new to anyone. One of the movies is all about a civil war, and it was split up into two teams. And I am definitely Team Captain America, whereas CJ, you are?
Oh, I'm definitely Team Iron Man.
So Team Iron Man. All right. That pretty much covers that question. I think that's going to be a telltale sign as to where we lean in these movies. Maybe, maybe not. But that's something that we had to get out of the way because I know my list is heavily influenced by the fact that I am Team Cap. So I guess I'll start with my number 10.
Well, hold on. I got to ask a question. Why are you Team Cap?
Okay, so...
Is it because of the people on the group, or is it because, the belief system?
I think it's the belief system, honestly. I think that Captain America has always been the pinnacle of a hero. I think he is definitely, without a doubt, Marvel's Superman equivalent, and I say that because Superman came first. But I think Captain America... Do you not like that analogy?
No.
I know you hate DC. But...
That's an insult to Captain America.
I think Captain America is the poster child of the epitome of a hero, and he's the epitome of selflessness and stuff like that. So without Captain America, I don't think the MCU would have had its spark or fire burn as long as it did. I think Captain America was definitely the glue that held everyone together.
So it sounds like you want him, or you choose him because of the character then.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, I thought you said the morals. So what I meant was of the whole Civil War situation, the reason there are two teams. Yeah. Okay. So what I'm getting at is, of course, I agree with, Captain America's ideas. If it was about just that, that's who I'm picking. But you put that dude up against Spider-Man, Iron Man, I'm on that team all the way.
Oh, okay. So it makes sense that you were to pick a team that has the hero that you follow. In this case, Spider-Man, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so that makes sense. So if we count that, then I think I'd still say Cap because, he had Ant-Man, who I really liked a lot. And, a lot of the people that didn't agree with the Accords and signing them were characters that I really like to follow. I think
what about Black Panther, dude?
Well, Black Panther, I think even though he was, I guess, kind of on Iron Man's side.
Yeah, definitely. For
different
reasons. But yeah, he's on his side.
I think he was more or less against Bucky than for Iron Man. So for me, I think if the Civil War movie would have been more of the Civil War comic, I still would have said Captain America because the fact that Wolverine was on Cap's side, and that's my favorite Marvel character. So anyway, with that out of the way.
Spider-Man was on his side too in the comics.
No, Spider-Man was on Iron Man's side. Because Iron Man...
No. Oh, true. Because, Iron Man convinced him to take off the mask. I was thinking it was the other way around.
Yep. Yeah. So basically, that's where I sit on that. Now, as far as... I'm going to start from 10 being not the worst, but 10 being my least favorite
of the top 10.
Of the top 10, yeah. So I'm going to start with my number 10, and then we'll go to CJ's number 10, and take it from there. So my number 10 on my list of top 10s is Captain America, the First Avenger. Now, the reason why I put that so low on the list is because I just like the other movies, obviously, just a little bit more, but I definitely think that the Captain America, the First Avenger was one of the better movies by itself just because of what it represented. I could talk about it all the time, but or the whole time rather. But I would like to know CJ's thoughts on this and what his number 10 movie is.
So I actually didn't look at your list before this, and I'm kind of laughing at the situation just because we did that whole bit before that was not quite predetermined. But my 10th movie was Iron Man, and I was thinking you were going to say for similar reasons.
That's crazy. I'm just now looking at your list. I didn't look at it. We talked a little bit about it before we hit record, but we definitely did not plan on it being like a tit for tat or, give and take kind of thing. But that's very telling.
So without giving away positions on your list, do you have Iron Man on your top 10?
Yes, I do have the very first Iron Man movie on my top 10.
Okay, because I don't have Captain America: The First Avenger.
Interesting.
I don't think so. No, I don't. Okay. I had to double check.
Well, what is your number 10 then?
So it was Iron Man, like I just said. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, that's
and
right. Yeah.
it was mainly because, so we were actually talking prior to the episode. I'm not a huge fan of the villain in the first Iron Man movie. Honestly, if they cut that movie off like 30 minutes earlier, I would have been good. So, like, how can you not love that whole opening sequence where, everything goes south? They take missile salvos, they capture Iron Man, and he builds his suit. You get the iconic hammering scene, right? And he comes out, kicks some butt, and heads back to the States and is like reacclimating and does that whole press conference. It really establishes Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark. And that's like one of the best casting decisions that Marvel has made ever, especially for where they were at. That was to kick off the MCU. They took at the time, washed up actor and made a franchise out of it. And I think that you can't, the movie I don't think stacks up against a bunch of the other ones, but it's just so important to the franchise that it had to be in my top 10.
I agree with that as far as pretty much everything you said. I agree that, it did bring real world talk. It brought Robert Downey Jr. back into Hollywood and took him out of a rut, whether it's an acting rut or a life rut, however you want to look at it. But it definitely cemented the MCU and made the cast just that much more impactful, starting with him. And the fact that the ad-lib, if I'm not mistaken, at the very end of the movie where he said, "I am Iron Man," that was not in the script.
I think you're right, yeah.
So, I mean, it's just such a bold move that kickstarted one of the greatest, if not the greatest, movie franchise of all time.
Which I think that's funny because when watching it and knowing that, the crowd and the way they respond seems scripted.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
100%.
So it's weird that they responded that way to that line. Like, was that those actors thinking on their feet? And it just looks kind of cheesy is all I'm saying. Like, it looks obvious that the way they acted whenever he says, "I'm Iron Man," they all stand up, and they ask all these questions, right?
Right.
So it's kind of hard to believe it's ad-libbed, especially because it's so integral to the story as well. So, like, how do you explain that whole part? But it's just kind of a dumb question.
Well, I mean, like, who really knows?
Yeah,
because
of course.
With movies, they do so many takes and so many, like, you look at someone like Stanley Kubrick. I've said this many, many times, like throughout my videos, that he put his actors through so much torture, and it was all because of his art. So, I mean, all these takes and all the reshoots and everything that make a movie, who knows where it's going to end up. And the fact that it worked and it wasn't something that doomed the franchise before it got to begin was just incredible.
Oh, yeah.
All right, so I guess we're going to move on to number 9.
Number 9.
My number 9 in my top 10 for the MCU is the original Ant-Man. Now, I had a hard time trying to figure it out. I know that when you get to my top 5, it's pretty much downhill from there. It was hard to make the list from the bottom up because I knew that my top 5, I knew what it was going to be, and it was pretty easy. From there, it was downhill, but getting everything else to fill out a top 10 was a little hard to come up with. So Ant-Man I knew was going to be on the list because I remember watching it. I remember how I felt watching it and how it seemed like when I saw Paul Rudd was the lead, I was like, oh God, what are they doing? And not that I hate Paul Rudd, but that's just not where I saw Paul Rudd. So I was like, wow, okay. And I watched it and I loved it. I loved that T.I. was in it. I forget his name, the Hispanic actor that played the other friend.
I don't remember.
Yeah, he's been in everything. I love him. He's great. Really, really funny. The sequences when they were trying to like break in and they it was just so funny. So I put the original Ant-Man at my number 9 just because it belongs on my top 10, and I knew it was closer to the bottom. So that's where I put Ant-Man. What about you, CJ?
I actually also don't have Ant-Man on the list at all.
Wow. Okay.
Just going to touch on it. I love the movie. But the whole time, and I always watch it. I'll always do watch throughs of the MCU, and I never skip any movies. Ant-Man, it just doesn't feel like an MCU movie to me. It feels like a good movie. It just doesn't feel like it's part of the MCU. It's kind of too separated for me to enjoy it as much as I would like to. Like I said, great movie. I'm still gonna keep watching it. It's just for me, it doesn't stack up against the others, and it's just not. It just feels separated. That's kind of it. But my number 9 is Doctor Strange, and that's our second Sherlock Holmes that's in the MCU.
Yes,
after Robert Downey Jr. And I had actually watched a little bit of Sherlock Holmes, and that was really my only familiarity with the actor Benedict Cumberbatch before Doctor Strange. And I really liked him then. I wasn't like a super fan, but I just liked him as an actor, and I thought it was super cool to see him make his way to the MCU and portray a character also just about perfectly. Like he is to Doctor Strange as Robert Downey Jr. is to Tony Stark. I think it's almost as good as that casting.
Oh, 100%.
And then I also didn't know the backstory of Doctor Strange before watching it. I just never got into his comics because the way he's written is kind of, I guess, monotone. Like it keeps like the same pace, and I just like more, I guess, action or going back and forth. So his character's origin story was super interesting to me, is all I'm getting at. And the whole struggle, being kind of arrogant and, humbling oneself over time. And it just showed once you humble yourself, you could be so much more powerful. Of course, all these movies have some sort of real world message. You're not going to get magical powers if you humble yourself a little bit, but
yeah,
it may feel like that way for some people.
It's interesting that you have him on lower on your list, because Doctor Strange is actually on my top 10, and he is much higher than he is on your list. So can't wait to get to that and say why I put him as so much higher. But that's interesting that your number 9 is Doctor Strange.
Well, I think the reason I kept it so low but still on the list is, obviously, like I just said, I love the origin of him, but the movie is written and, directed very similar to the comics, where it's kind of monotone to some degree, and it keeps the same kind of level of energy throughout the whole movie. So I could see how it can lose some attention. It can lose my attention sometimes. Maybe I'm just a child and I can't focus on anything but bright colors, but it's one of those things that you just gotta, really, I guess, read more into it to enjoy it more. And sometimes I'm just not up for reading too much into things, I guess.
Well, that makes sense. I mean, you go to the movies not necessarily to overanalyze. You go there just for a good time and for storytelling and stuff. So I totally understand that. And it was a little convoluted. There were times where I had to remind myself that it was an MCU movie, especially in the beginning with him becoming Doctor Strange,
Sure.
And, the costume is a big part of Doctor Strange. It's a big, part of his character. And he, when he was an actual doctor, I was like, okay, oh yeah, this is an MCU movie.
Yeah. And I was super disappointed that they did the yellow gloves in the after credit scene of like Thor, right? And they got rid of them in the movie.
Don't get me started on that, because we only got to see them in the after credit scene, and I believe
and those made the costume.
Yep, and the beginning of Ragnarok, and that's it. Because that yellow, from an artist's perspective, coming from me being an artist, that hint of yellow on a red and blue, because red and blue are such, iconic characters for superheroes. I mean, Spider-Man, Superman, Captain Marvel, like all these heroes, sport the red and blue look. So the fact that Doctor Strange is another hero that has that same look, having that yellow breaks it up, especially with the hands, because Doctor Strange is all about his hands.
Exactly.
And it's such a focal point for me. So I was a little disappointed that they didn't do that. I know they were trying to emphasize that his hands had to be worked on constantly with the surgery and all that. But I just think that they should have, at least at the very end,
when he finally was realized as Doctor Strange.
Right after the Dormammu thing, they should have done it. They should have had him, have the yellow gloves and
pop the glove on at the very end.
Right, like a doctor, yeah. Well, that's interesting that...
Another big thing, though, is just kind of to touch on that more, it's definitely one of those movies that the more I watch it, the more I enjoy it. So if we did the same topic in like 2 years after I've seen the movie a few more times, or, I've seen it probably a solid dozen times already, like... That's a bad thing to say. But, if it gets to the point where I'm watching as much as I watch Star Wars or something like that, like the original trilogy, and I've seen it maybe 10 more times, I'll probably have it like close to the top 3,
That makes a lot of sense, because some of these movies, that's just how they work out, you know. So are you ready to move on? Number 8?
Yeah. So for number 8.
Oh, I haven't said mine yet.
Okay. I didn't know.
You're good. All right. So my number 8 is Spider-Man Homecoming. Now, I think...
How dare you?
I knew I was going to get a reaction from CJ. He's a huge Spider-Man fan, and I put it really low on my list. I mean, number 8's still pretty good. because it's in the top 10. And you got to remember, out of 23 movies, we had to pick 10. That's not very, I mean, we spent literally like 35 minutes trying to figure this out between the two of us. So for me, Spider-Man Homecoming was a fantastic movie on a couple of fronts. I unfortunately, and I know I'm probably going to strike a nerve, you know, in you,
I'm
CJ.
leaving the podcast tonight.
I unfortunately was on the bandwagon of Tom Holland Spider-Man being more of like an Iron Man Jr. than he was a Spider-Man. And it kind of rubbed me the wrong way because I grew up watching, you know, Spider-Man the Animated Series, and obviously I grew up with the Raimi trilogy, and, you know, you either love them or you hate them as far as the Raimi trilogy goes. But for me, Spider-Man was always very much his own hero. He wasn't really in the shadow or in as an apprentice. I never saw Spider-Man as an apprentice. Granted, Tom Holland is probably the youngest Spider-Man portrayal in cinema so far. We kind of have it going down from where, even though Peter Parker in the Sam Raimi universe was in high school, Peter Parker was not, Tobey Maguire was not in high school. So
it was like 47 in that movie.
yeah, so he's like the oldest Spider-Man. And then you get the Andrew Garfield, which is like the college Spider-Man. And then you get the Tom Holland, which is very much the high school Spider-Man. So for me, it just, not that he was the youngest, not to confuse that, but for me, it was that he was very much in Tony Stark's shadow, and I didn't care for that. I didn't like how fast he got the Iron Spider. I didn't like how fast he got a high-tech suit. I was kind of hoping for him to still knit together a Spider-Man suit, you know, have the one that he made with the goggles and everything, but then also have one that was just maybe, you know, give it something like a, I don't know, like a heat retardant or something like that, but not have it to be like basically an Iron Man suit. With that being said, the movie was still very well done, and the saving grace for me, the reason why I ranked it higher than Ant-Man and Captain America: The First Avenger, is because of the villain. I think that Spider-Man Homecoming has probably one of the best, if not the best, MCU villains in the entire franchise. In Vulture, I think Michael Keaton stole the role. He stole the spotlight. It was a good compliment to the Spider-Man movie. I think that Vulture was always a very underutilized villain because he just wasn't a fan favorite like your Venom or your Carnage or even your Green Goblin. But I really, really enjoyed what Michael Keaton did with the role. CJ and I off camera talked about the motivations of some of the MCU villains are why they're so great. And I think that Vulture's motivation was one of the only ones that you can kind of vibe with. He was trying to provide for his family and pretty much got shafted. Did I agree with what he ended up doing? Not really, but we're all human beings, and there's an argument for that too. So that's why I picked Spider-Man Homecoming as far as like my favorite Spider-Man movie. I didn't put like Far From Home in there, even though we only have those two right now. But Homecoming is my number 8. Now, CJ, please flame me because I'm giving you the mic now.
So I thought I put Spider-Man way too low. I thought it deserved better than where I have it on my list, but I felt like I had to put it where I had it. And it hurts me that you have Spider-Man Homecoming that low on your list. It does. We might not be friends after this. Of course, that's not the case. But, you know, there's one thing that you said there that I really do agree with, and I kind of think was a big miss in that movie, but not enough to put it in number 8 on my list, was the suit. I would have loved to see like a good suit that he made himself that wasn't quite to the level of what he has now.
Right.
I mean, before the Iron Spider, even when he was given this one with the AI and all these gadgets in it, that's cool. I want to see that, but show that to me in, you know, the second movie or the third movie. Give me one where he's learning to be Spider-Man. Right. I mean, we got where he's learning, but where he's learning without all that extra assistance.
Yeah.
Where maybe he's making certain devices, you know, more often. He does a little bit again, but where he's really doing that more on his own. And take something from the comics where he learns about, like, he fights a new villain, learns how to beat them, and builds new gadgets or upgrades to his suit. And that just becomes a steady thing, right? In the comics or even in the video games, it comments how, like, he fought Electro. So he started wearing rubber gloves.
Right.
Like kitchen gloves.
Yep.
And then later versions of the suit just had that, you know, integrated rubber. So he's not being electrocuted every time he fights him, you know?
Yeah, it's basically like learning from your fights. I totally vibe with that, but that was my biggest qualm too. And I'm glad that you agree with that, because that's kind of the only reason why I wouldn't, you know, that I would argue to the end of time about it. Just give him his spotlight. And so yeah. I definitely agree with that.
Well, you also took away a potential for more character development.
Yeah, 100%.
And story development, really.
Yeah.
I guess I'll move on to mine. Mine's going to be way more controversial than yours, though.
Oh, boy.
My number 8 is Captain Marvel.
Oh, okay.
The fact that it's on the list is controversial, not because it's that low.
Well, we finally hit a movie that's nowhere in my list because if I put Spider-Man Homecoming in number 8, and
Captain Marvel's not on that list.
Yeah, definitely not.
Now, I have it on there for a few reasons, and it is not because Brie Larson. It is despite Brie Larson. Similar to how the Dark Knight movie is good despite Batman being in it. If you take Batman out of that movie, it's a decent movie. Batman makes that movie worse.
Okay.
You could be upset about that too, guys. So Captain Marvel, one, I love the 90s aesthetic. Like every time I see anything that's like obviously 90s, I'm all about it. So every time anything's popped up on the screen, I'm like, I'm here. That's the big thing. Nick Fury as a character. He's obviously way more prevalent. You're getting a much younger Nick Fury, and he's kind of establishing himself as who he becomes later in the movies.
Mm-hmm.
I love seeing that. Coulson, he wasn't entirely, greatly important in the movie, but it was nice to see him again, especially after watching Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. And he's in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. You haven't watched the show as much, have you?
I didn't finish it. I know I did like the first 2 seasons, but yeah, I really enjoyed the first 2 seasons though.
Yeah, he sticks around for most of it, so it's nice. It's nice to see him in the actual MCU again, and that's just like it's almost like a cameo at that point, like because he doesn't contribute so much to it, but it's still great to see him. I'm not gonna get too deep into how much I may or may not dislike Brie Larson as a person, but I think her portrayal of Carol Danvers was actually pretty solid, and the dynamic between Carol Danvers and Nick Fury was awesome, in my opinion.
I do like the chemistry, like if that's what you're getting at.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
Yeah, I did like the chemistry. Nick Fury, I think, was another but another character. I mean, it's just so many characters. He definitely was another one that was underutilized. The most I got from Nick Fury for the most of the MCU was Tony Stark just, crapping on him because he had one eye. So I'm really glad that he had that. And they even covered how he lost the eye, which I thought that was pretty cool. I didn't put it on my list just because for me, it's just a nostalgia movie. To me, it's just like a 0.5 or, like a half of a movie plot. For me, like the Captain Marvel character, I never really cared for just because I didn't think the MCU needed a, Superman-esque kind of a character with all the,
Sure.
Impermeable or whatever. I more or less was more into like Rogue being like the female who was super strong and could fly and all that. But the movie, I did like the fact that they put so much attention and detail into the set design and to making it feel like it was in the 80s, and the Air Force influence, and the fact that she was, just like Steve, she was a member of the armed forces and stuff like that. And it made me believe that there was an otherworldly presence, like when they go off world and all that. I just didn't care for the fact that the movie just didn't leave a lasting. I saw it in the theater like most of the other MCU movies, and I just left it going, okay, kind of like some of the other ones on the list, or even some of the ones I didn't even put on the list, where I watched it and I was like, do I hate it? No, but I can kind of take it or leave it. And Captain Marvel, unfortunately, was one of those for me.
Well, I definitely think that the fact that Brie Larson was in that movie drove a lot of fans away from it, and because of her, it got a worse rap than I think it deserved. Another side of it that I didn't really touch yet is the Skrulls. It showed us the Skrulls. It gave them depth. It showed that they weren't the bad guys and that they started to help. That whole bit there, I loved it. Where it was their struggle. And another thing is Carol Danvers is a character in the comic books. I could care less. I don't want to read a Captain Marvel comic with Carol Danvers. Marvel, maybe, but Carol Danvers is just kind of 2-dimensional and like not entertaining. And I actually liked her more in the movie than I would in the comics.
That's fair. I mean, I and just to be clear, I did not think the movie was okay or even meh, because of the whole controversy between Brie Larson and the higher ups, or Brie Larson and her castmates or whatever,
or Brie Larson and the fans,
to be honest.
Male.
Yeah. So for me, all of that happened way after I saw it in theaters, way after I paid my money to go buy a ticket and buy the DVD or whatever. So for me, it was just more or less the movie itself. I was able to disconnect just because I didn't know. I was able to disconnect her from the character, from the real life controversy and all that stuff. So it had nothing to do with my decision on just not caring for the movie. The movie just did nothing for me. But with all that being said, are we ready to move on to number 7?
Yeah, let's move to 7.
So we've finally arrived at where I put the original Iron Man on my list as number 7.
That's fair.
Again, the only reason is because as we go closer to number 1, I have more and more reasons why those movies are, higher up. Iron Man, as CJ said when he mentioned it on his list, is one of the, if not the pinnacle of the MCU. Jon Favreau sparked something in 2008 that just blew all other cinematic achievements that were supposed to be series out of the water. I mean, what the MCU became, I don't have to tell you guys. If you're watching this podcast, then obviously you're into the MCU, you're into nerd culture, you know what it did. It sold millions, if not billions and billions of dollars in product. It got people reading comic books again. It just cemented so much. So it all started, in my opinion, with Iron Man. Yes, we got Blade. We got a couple Punisher movies. This, of course, the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies. We've gotten a lot of other comic book movies. But when Iron Man came out, it just changed the game. And it saved one man's film career. It furthered another one. We just looked up some trivia on the fact that Jeff Bridges' character was a lot of his own design as far as his look. He shaved his head. He grew his beard. Obadiah Stane was like his thing, and Jon Favreau let him go with it, and he had a lot of lines and a lot of parts that were cut from the movie just because of time and scheduling and stuff, I'm sure, but it definitely cemented the less is more, because Obadiah Stane you really believed that he was a bad guy, and I did not see the twist coming. I know some people did, but I did not. I did not see him turning around and just being the one responsible for the hit on Tony and all that stuff. So that's why I put Iron Man on. It's number 7 in my list, not because it's bad, but I knew that it had to be in my 10.
All right. Well, my number 7 is actually not based off of the merits of the movie or really the storyline or anything like that, but of what it did for me and Marvel, and that's the Avengers movie, the first Avengers movie. That is the first of the entire MCU that I actually saw in theaters. Prior to that, I didn't care for it. I could take it or leave it. I was, Iron Man came out originally in 2008?
2008, yep.
I was 11.
That's fair.
Yeah. I, at the time, just wasn't a huge fan. I, at the time, was like, I'm all about, Sam Raimi Spider-Man. And I think that was, when did Amazing Spider-Man come out with Andrew Garfield?
I want to say it was like in 2013?
Okay.
14?
Well, I mean, obviously it wasn't there yet, but, I was all about Spider-Man. As a kid, like younger than that, I liked the Hulk, Iron Man was a character that at the time I didn't care about, so I guess I just didn't pay much attention to them. After that, you had the Hulk movie. I did like that one, like I said, and that was made by Universal, so it was pretty different.
Yeah.
I like Ed Norton Jr., but, the movie isn't good. I was a kid. That's why I liked it as a kid. And the same thing, Sam Raimi. I like the movies as a kid, and now I like them more as nostalgia than anything else, and as comedy. they're great comedies.
That's one man's opinion.
We can talk more about it later. I'm down to talk about Spider-Man for hours.
Oh, of course. I think we have an episode for a future podcast that's all about Spider-Man, so
maybe I'll save some opinions for that.
Yeah.
But anyways, yeah, so Avengers is the first one I saw in theaters. I think that also came out, what year was that, like 2012?
Yeah.
So that was actually the time I also moved to this area. So I didn't even see that movie on my own volition. We went because my cousin was going, and they were all into it.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
So I went and watched Avengers in theaters, and that's when I first got into it. Like the banter between all the characters, and it was never one character that got me into the MCU. It was the dynamic. It was seeing all these big characters on the screen, because you really don't see that a lot in a lot of other franchises or movies. So didn't care about Black Widow or Hawkeye. Still don't. I do not want a Black Widow movie. We could talk more about that later. I like Scarlett Johansson. I like Jeremy Renner,
Yeah.
but the characters are just not interesting to me. So I could take them or leave them. Thor at the time, super powerful character, but to me at the time, I didn't care much for him, and we'll talk more about it later as I get to my later entries into this list. Iron Man, that's kind of when I started liking him as a character, and then Captain America, and then their dynamics, how they work together. They're both kind of the leader of the group, but at the same time, they butt heads, and it shows the two different sides of it, and the banter between them, banter between everybody else and them. And then also, that was the first time we saw Mark Ruffalo as the Hulk, was it not?
Yeah, it was actually basically like a mini introduction of the new Hulk, because Disney pretty much did not have the full, and they still don't have the rights to have the Incredible Hulk on Disney Plus. I don't think many people are complaining about that, to be honest. Nothing against the movie, but I think that it was their attempt at, this is the new Hulk.
Yeah, I mean, they still count the first one as part of the MCU because they did that after credit scene.
Yeah, and that's the only thing that's keeping it in the MCU is the after credit scene.
And it was Tony Stark comes in.
Yep.
Yeah, right.
Yep.
So I don't think that movie's that bad. I still have that nostalgic value for it, and I always watch it every time I watch the movies. The Hulk, Incredible Hulk movie.
Oh yeah, 100%.
And it always has a place in my heart, but it's definitely not at the top. But anyways, back to like Mark Ruffalo as the Hulk is fantastic. Now I'm not saying because he perfectly represents Bruce Banner from the comics, because I don't know that he does, but neither did Ed Norton Jr.
I don't know. I think the Hulk's a very complicated character because it is two characters. So it's the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde of Marvel. So it's kind of hard to say that. But I think Mark Ruffalo did a great job.
No, I think he did awesome. I just don't know if it's, completely accurate or who I see. If I were to like cast the movie myself, I probably wouldn't put him there. But he's doing great, and I want an individual Hulk movie with Mark Ruffalo.
I actually do too. I think that we both fall in the unpopular opinion in that, because a lot of people are like, why? It's basically like,
that's a tough one, is why and how do you do it, right? I agree with that, but I still need it in my life.
Well, because, and I think objectively the reason why everyone's like, or most people are like up in arms about don't waste the money, is because the main character, as we just mentioned, it's half of one person. So no one really cares about a runtime about a big green monster who's really upset, unless it's the Hulk from Endgame.
But they put Black Widow in her own movie, and they did my boy Taskmaster dirty. We'll talk more about that later.
We will. But
yeah, Avengers, just because of kind of what it did for me, it's really what got me into. It's what got me into the MCU in general, and then realistically, obviously, that delves more into just becoming a bigger Marvel fan. So first it was only a few characters. Now I just love Marvel, and I gotta have all of it.
I mean, that's fair. The Avengers was definitely the breakthrough. It was the MCU's, like, I don't want to say second wind, but it was definitely their second stride, because it was what the whole purpose of the franchise was for that never before unprecedented motion of having all of these big names who have their own movies established in this giant culmination of this giant, where the plot was probably the smallest part about it. Everything was the concept of bringing back a summer blockbuster. And I was lucky enough to see it in theaters because I was working nights, and that was why I missed a lot. I missed the Incredible Hulk. I missed the first Captain America movie because my schedule was working 11 to 7. So I said, come hell or high water, I will watch the Avengers in theaters because that's what this is about. So I'm glad that it made your list, because I don't know many people that care for that one, because the Avengers was geared more towards kids in many people's opinions, and in my opinion, to some degree. It was catered a lot to kids with all the, the colors and the lack of, not to say that violence equals greatness, but it's a comic book movie, and it's very easy for your enemy to be an alien and have black blood or no blood at all or whatever, and then have your 6-year-old go watch it, as opposed to some of the more visceral comics that are out there, like Old Man Logan and stuff like that. So Disney's marketing in Marvel, the Avengers, was brilliant because it made a buttload of money, and it made a bunch of fans love the series, and it made a bunch of new fans love the series, like the little ones. So it was definitely, it's on my list as well, but it's not as low as it is on yours. So with that being said, my number 6, that's where we're up to, right? Six,
yeah.
Is Marvel's The Avengers. So it's just one notch above CJ's, and I don't really have to spend a whole lot of time talking about it because I literally just did. It represented what the franchise, the direction it was going in, and it was basically the pit stop for Marvel. It's where they were headed, and then from there they were like, okay, how are we going to keep going? And obviously, because we know now that we're in the future, my 2012-year-old self can know that they did end up going to the Infinity Saga and all that. So, but back then, I didn't know that that's where they were going. So,
your 2012-year-old,
my 2012 self. That's what I meant to say.
Damn, you're older than I thought.
Yeah, I'm really old, man. But yeah, so for me, it would be the first Avengers. I would put that as my number 6. So what about you, CJ? What's your number 6?
So my number 6 is actually Guardians of the Galaxy.
Interesting.
That came out after I was into Marvel. That's when I was established as a fan. I've seen all the movies many times, and I'm all about it now. And then Guardians comes up as a trailer. At first, I didn't even know it was a Marvel movie.
Same.
And then once it was coming out, I was like, and I realized it was a Marvel movie. I was like, oh, I'm definitely watching it. It was a comic book adaptation that I wasn't familiar with. And that was one of the biggest things for me, is that they took something totally new for me. And I know for a lot of other fans as well, because they're just not as popular as a bunch of other ones. But that was really the first introduction by cinema of new characters in the MCU for me. And the soundtrack is fantastic. First of all, the best soundtrack out of any of the Marvel movies, even better than the second one, in my opinion.
I think, well, definitely better than the second one. I think, honestly, I would agree with you. There are some other soundtracks that I will touch on because they're a big part of the rest of my list. But I think as far as one CD, I think Guardians 1 would probably be the best.
I mean, yeah, there's a ton of gems across the MCU, especially anything associated with Iron Man, all the AC/DC.
Oh, yeah.
And I love that, right?
Right.
But, I mean, like, from beginning to end soundtrack, every song is fantastic on Guardians of the Galaxy. And how do you beat that?
True. Very true.
And then it gets to the characters. Like, it was a perfectly diverse cast. Originally, the only character I didn't care for in the team was probably Gamora. Obviously, I like her more later on in, like, the MCU because she gets more built as a character. You learn more about her, who she is attached to and whatnot, and she builds attachment to Peter Quill. Star-Lord is just kind of like the goofy guy that bumbles around but tries to be the ringleader. Drax, his like weird, sarcastic, very not serious, but complacent sense of humor, I guess.
Yeah.
However you say that, like, he doesn't understand humor, but he's funny, but he's not trying to be.
And that's why it is funny.
Exactly. Yeah. So, love Drax as the character. And then Rocket and Groot is, how can you not love them, right?
Right.
Groot is a tree.
Rocket and Groot are basically like the R2-D2 and C-3PO of the Guardians, if not the MCU.
I don't know about that because, those two characters, R2-D2 and C-3PO, to me are, and this is going to be controversial.
Okay.
In the original trilogy, it's just kind of whatever,
Mm-hmm.
They're cool. They have some charm, but it wasn't until like later movies where they kind of were more established that I started liking them as much as characters.
I think that's objectively correct, really, because if you think about it, we talked about this. We talk about this all the time. You guys know, if you're viewers of the channel, CJ and I are huge Star Wars fans. It's a big part of our lives, and we talk about it pretty much. We find any time to talk about Star Wars. So I think that with that being said, in the beginning, nobody knew what C-3PO and R2-D2 were going to become, let alone who Luke Skywalker was going to become. So I think that that's accurate in saying, but my not to confuse or to confuse you guys or even you CJ. The reason why I bring up the parallel is because if you take R2-D2 and C-3PO as many times as we've seen them and have them be the only, even if it's in the Clone Wars, the only characters on camera, have them have their own little mini arc, then people, I enjoyed it. I love it. They don't need anyone to make it a funny moment. And that's out of the Guardians, Groot and Rocket are the only characters that they can do that with, because it's going to be a good time. It's either going to be really funny or really sad or really, entertaining in some way, shape, or form. And that's all I meant by that. But anyway, yeah, go ahead.
Well, for sure. Yeah. I mean, basically all I was getting at is, I like R2-D2 and C-3PO, but I liked them more and more as it went on. And I didn't care too much of them when I was younger, or like when I first started seeing Star Wars. Rocket and Groot, I loved them as soon as they were on the screen.
Gotcha.
That's really all I'm getting at. I just like the dynamic of Rocket and Groot as well, the comedy. Oh, another thing is the kind of fake out death that you get of Groot at the end. He sacrifices himself, and it's like a super sad moment, and then he comes back as a little baby Groot, and everybody loves him. And then that's another thing, and it's not part of this movie, but later on, as he's growing up, and you see the different phases, you see the baby Groot just kind of like running around trying to figure stuff out.
How he's an adolescent,
and then the teen Groot is hilarious.
Yeah,
I'm ready to see. I guess more of an adolescent would probably be a better name for the next phase.
Right.
I'm excited to see that, and kind of him maybe almost being a similar to a Quill type character, where he's kind of arrogant, but still is pretty powerful.
Yeah.
And then he'll get to Groot, where he just kind of does things.
The Groot that he was in the first one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Eventually we'll be there.
It's almost like Fox and Harry Potter when it's like super sad when Fox just like balls up in the flames and Harry's like, "What did I do?" And Dumbledore's like, "Dude, chill out. He'll be back in like 5 seconds."
Yeah, but anybody who knows anything about any type of mythical creature lore
True.
knew who was going to come back anyways. Like,
Especially a phoenix.
exactly, right? Like, it's a phoenix. So if you knew what a phoenix was prior to that, you're like, oh, who cares? It's going to come right back, you know?
That's fair.
Yeah.
So I think we're ready to move on to number 5.
5, yeah, sure. Let's do it.
So my number 5 is a movie that was on CJ's list much lower down, and that's Doctor Strange. Now, again, we did talk a lot about Doctor Strange when CJ ranked it, but for me, the reasons why I have it as number 5 is because of the character development, the fact that he started off as this rich brain surgeon who, you know, had everything, had the money, had the fame, had the respect, demanded the respect, however you want to look at it, and then all of a sudden got brought down right back down to like the beginning of anyone's, you know, development. He had to pretty much learn how to be an adult and learn how to be self-sufficient all over again. But he was the same person that lived the life of quote unquote not needing anyone because he was Dr. Stephen Strange. So now he gets humbled really fast and, you know, pretty much told, hey, you're not the greatest thing since sliced bread, you know, stop, get over yourself, and learned who he was destined to become. And that was Doctor Strange, not the surgeon, but Doctor Strange, master of the mystic arts. So I really, really enjoyed the visuals. I thought that the very ending with Dormammu was just hilarious. A bunch of people that I talked to said that it was very, very annoying and it made the movie, like it just ruined the movie for them. I thought it was funny. I thought it was a great way of showing the power of the time stone and the contrast of the colors. I think it's perfect that they went with that route because Dormammu is one of those villains that it's kind of like Galactus for me. Like I want to see Galactus on the big screen, but I don't want like a 2-hour runtime on what Galactus's agenda is because I just don't care because it's very simple. He just wants to eat worlds, you know. I'd rather see him do what they did in what people don't like. I get it, but I'm still going to reference it. The Fantastic Four movie where he just dispenses the Silver Surfer, and Silver Surfer is more interesting in my opinion. So for me, Doctor Strange was good because of the character development and because the acting was really well done. I really enjoyed, Tilda Swinton, I think is her name.
Oh, she was awesome.
Yeah, as the Ancient One. I loved it. She's the only person I think that can play an androgynous character and just totally nail it every single time. She did it in Constantine with Gabriel. I just loved it.
Now, the casting of Tilda Swinton was super controversial when it happened.
I'm not surprised, but I was unaware.
So I get why, and I could definitely agree with it. That being said, and I guess I should just go why. The biggest thing is because the Ancient One was an Asian character.
Oh, I see.
And they now put a white person to play that role. And I get that, and I agree with it. I don't want them to do that.
Right.
That being said, if you look at it as a whole nother character, so for me, coming from the lens of a person that wasn't familiar with the Ancient One as a character. I knew of Doctor Strange, but I didn't know of the Ancient One. I think that it was a super interesting and super well done character. If you take away the controversy behind it, sure, I'm all for it. Later on, now I kind of wish they just gave her a different name and said this is a different character, or I mean, they do all kinds of stuff, right? Like with the Into the Spider-Verse, Doc Ock was a female.
Yeah, and I don't think, I mean, because it's the Ancient One. And, that is a character that is named, so to speak, but it's not like a hard name like Luke Skywalker,
It is, but it isn't.
Right.
I get what you're saying, but it still kind of is.
I understand. I mean, and I'm one of those type of people that I don't believe that when you cast, like, for example, Nick Fury in the comics was always white. And, until now. And now it's like, if I see a Nick Fury, I have to remind myself, as bad as this sounds, I have to remind myself that, a person with a SHIELD uniform and an eye patch, regardless of what ethnicity they are, that's Nick Fury, because the new Nick Fury is Samuel L. Jackson.
Exactly.
I think it works fantastically. I mean, they did the same thing, even though the movie sucked, in my opinion, and probably yours too, Daredevil with Ben Affleck. And
I've never seen it.
Really? Well, I guess that's going to be something we put on the regular portion of the channel.
Yeah, I was actually going to talk about that. So since we're here, might as well touch on it.
Yeah.
There's several MCU movies, or not MCU movies, Marvel movies that are not MCU that I haven't seen. There's quite a few of them.
Perfect, because that means that we're just going to have so much more content for the real reactions portion of the channels.
And I thought also we could do a little podcast about them after that.
Sure, that sounds like a great follow-up.
So yeah, I've seen obviously the Sam Raimi movies and Amazing Spider-Man because I love them. I've seen the Eric Bana Hulk. It's just, actually I rewatched it not too long ago, like less than a year ago. I haven't seen Punisher or Daredevil.
Oh wow. Or Elektra, probably.
I didn't even know there was an Elektra movie.
Wow. Okay, so that's definitely going to be what we tackle at some point.
Wasn't there 2 different Punisher movies?
Yeah, there's actually 3.
Oh my.
There's one with Dolph Lundgren from the 80s. And then there's one with Thomas Jane, which is my favorite, with John Travolta as the bad guy. And then and then there's a newer one, the most recent one. I forget the guy's name. He was, do you remember the other guys?
Yeah.
He was the bad guy from Australia.
I mean, I wouldn't know who he is off the top of my head. It's been a while.
It was basically based off of the Punisher War Journal comics, and it was called Punisher Warzone. Sorry, and it was pretty faithful to the comics. So it was nice, but I think it just came out at a wrong time, or maybe it was just not. I guess it wasn't the right time. That's the best way to put it. But But anyway, I'd like to do that.
Kind of tying the Punisher back to Nick Fury.
Yeah.
I've read a few comics. I read a few. I collect a bunch of comics. I have a ton. But I've read a few comics that have specifically the Punisher and Nick Fury both in them. And all the ones I've read, at least, or that I could think of off the top of my head, were pre-MCU versions of Nick Fury.
Gotcha.
Because now in the comics, they model Nick Fury after Samuel Jackson.
Yes.
Which I think is awesome. But Nick Fury and the Punisher look a lot alike.
They really comics. Do, except for the patch.
Well, like their outfit, right?
Right.
And their patch. But comic books don't always show you a perfect frontal view of every character. So you're not, if you don't know a profile view, you might miss it.
Right.
So if Nick Fury's looking on his good side and you can kind of just see his shoulder, you don't know if it's Nick Fury or Punisher because they kind of have that salt and pepper hair. Usually the sides are like white and the top was black.
Right.
So I think although, they changed the look completely of Nick Fury, one, Samuel Jackson did awesome, and I love it. But I think even for the comics, it was for the better because now they're easier to differentiate. And in the long run, massively, like a huge move, like a great move,
Yeah, I really enjoyed, it's seamless, like we talked about. I think most people think it's seamless that Samuel L. Jackson is Nick Fury. So I totally understand the argument with the Ancient One, though. I do understand that when you don't cast a Native American to play a Native American, or when you don't cast a black person to play a black person, I get how that can be, very controversial and it could rub people the wrong way and stuff like that. But I definitely want to go on the record as saying that because a character, for example, Nick Fury was white in the comics and all of a sudden they made the decision to make him a black character, I think that didn't take away from the role. I think we could agree on that. I think it didn't necessarily make the role better, but it's accepted. And I think Nick Fury will be cemented as modeled after Samuel L. Jackson.
No, I completely agree with you in that it doesn't take away from the role, but personally, I am big on accuracy to some degree.
I get that.
So I would prefer them to say, here is Samuel L. Jackson. He is a new character named X, whatever, that is a new director of S.H.I.E.L.D. In the MCU, he's the only director of S.H.I.E.L.D. Just make it your own.
Yeah.
I get you want to keep Nick Fury, but I mean, Nick Fury in the comics is not everybody's, super sold on that, especially with the MCU at the time. It's a new thing. Not many people know about the comics, in all honesty. Comics weren't big at the time.
True.
So in my opinion, I would say name him something completely different and say he's the director of S.H.I.E.L.D.
I can agree with that.
And then it's the same character.
I should say I can appreciate that. I just personally, it doesn't bother me, but I can see why it would, is where I was getting. I can see why people would be like accuracy. Because, we cosplay. We want to be accurate. I get that. The accuracy, I get it. But as far as a storytelling perspective, I'm always open to everything. But anyway, we could talk about that all day.
Yeah.
I think that Doctor Strange was a really, really good movie. And I think it's a movie that can stand on its own. It's kind of like a filler movie because it was just an origin story. Kind of like a lot of the MCU movies, but that's what they were supposed to be. But I think Doctor Strange, the message, the fact that, you're not the greatest thing ever. You can always improve. You should always remember your roots, and you should always remember that, you're not the greatest thing ever. You're great, but you're not the greatest thing ever. You can be really great, but there's no way that, you're better than anyone else, is what I was getting at. So that's why I put that on the list. And that starts my top 5. CJ, what about you? What's your number 5?
So my number 5 is actually Black Panther.
Interesting.
And I know you have to have that on your list.
Oh, I definitely
And you haven't said it yet, so it's
I have
easily
not.
in your top 4. So I'm sure we'll have a lot to talk about here. So first and foremost, I wasn't terribly familiar with him as a character. I knew of him. I knew a little bit about him before like he was revealed in Civil War and before Black Panther movie came out. So I didn't, have a lot to go off of. So the establishment of him as a character, his kind of storyline of living up to the role of his father, I thought was really good. He is a little arrogant, not quite Doctor Strange or Tony Stark levels, but there's a little bit there. But at the same time, he is already super humble. And that's why he thinks he's not good enough to live up to his father's role. And it's kind of seeking a self, like, I guess, actualization. I don't know if that's a proper word for it, but like seeing his own self-worth, saying, okay, yes, I am worthy, almost like a Thor type thing, but in a different aspect of it.
Right.
I really appreciated that whole character development throughout that movie. And the other side is Killmonger's an awesome villain.
He sure is.
Another villain, aside from the Vulture that you mentioned earlier, and I won't talk about Michael Keaton too much later on when I get to my Spider-Man, because it's going to be in my top 4 now.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But I think it's very similar in that he is a realistic villain. Well, Vulture's not too realistic because of the wings, but like as a character, super realistic and in a way relatable. And in Killmonger's case, realistic up until he gets the powers, right?
Right, exactly.
That fight scene, both at the beginning when he fights M'Baku, Black Panther, for the throne, essentially, was awesome. And then the fight scene later on between T'Challa and Killmonger was fantastic. Not knowing much about it, I didn't know who Killmonger was prior to that. He's now like probably one of my top 5 villains in the MCU / Marvel Comics. He's super interesting at that point. I love the whole like notches on his skin for all the kill. It's crazy. Like
right.
like you wouldn't do that. Like,
let's establish that it's not something we advocate.
Exactly. But it looks awesome.
Right.
And they did a great job at portraying it as well. The acting, especially of Michael B. Jordan, was fantastic. Chadwick was great too, but I think Michael B. Jordan really took that role and ran with it, and he made it awesome. So I mean, I don't know of anything bad about the movie. I'm starting to mix movies up with what I'm trying to think about, but the whole bit at the end when Killmonger died based off of in a way his own arrogance.
Right.
I don't know if arrogance is the best word for it, but you get what I'm saying. And that T'Challa, accepted him like still as a member of his people, and didn't like revel in his death. Obviously, we never expected him to do it, but like held him almost as a brother, as a friend, as he died, and they watched the sunset in Wakanda. That was just such a moving scene, beautiful. I loved it. And I imagine you're going to have a lot of the same stuff to say about it.
And I was just about to say, the only reason why I'm not touching on anything or elaborating on any of your points is because it is in my top 10, and I have loads to say, complimenting what you say, and also a little bit more of what it meant to me. But that's awesome that it's in your top 5, because it's definitely in my top 5 without giving too much away preemptively. But anyway, I guess we could just move on to number 4. And my number 4 is Captain America. Yes, another Captain America movie. Winter Soldier. Now, it was a toss-up between putting my number 4, number 3 in the order that I did, because I enjoyed them for different reasons, but I also enjoyed them kind of the same amount. And I kind of had to have a little mini breakdown as to which one I enjoyed a little bit more, which one I identified with a little bit more, resonated, that kind of thing. So Captain America Winter Soldier, for me, one scene makes that movie super memorable, and that is the elevator scene. Obviously, a lot of people love that scene. If you're not familiar with the scene I'm referring to, by some reason, I think you guys all know what I'm talking about. It's when he's in the elevator with who is soon to become Crossbones and all of his henchmen, and they're in the elevator, and he says, "Does anybody want to get off before we start?" I loved it, because to me, those of you who know me, I am a huge, obviously comic book fan, but I have this like incredible sense of admiration. The military runs in my family pretty deep. Most of the men in my family, like my family history, as far as like generations go back, as far as I am aware of, have joined either the military or some sort of civil service. So the fact that Captain America, is a military soldier turned superhero character, for me, it's huge. And the fact that he doesn't like to fight, but he knows he has to end conflict. And to me, that scene cemented that, because he, in a joking way, because we all laughed and chuckled in the theater, but he literally was like, "Hey, those of you who don't really want to go down this route, I'm giving you a pass, but it is going to happen. So, pretty much the hope for peace, prepare for war mentality. And I really enjoyed that. Obviously, that's not the only reason why I like it, and that's not the only reason why it's my number 4. But I do really enjoy the chemistry between Cap and Winter Soldier. I know you guys don't know who our friend Frankie is, but obviously CJ knows who he is. He and I are both from New York, and he's been in the Army for many, many years. And I always, when I say happy birthday to him, I either have a little thumbnail or some sort of photograph showing Captain America and Bucky because he loves Captain America. That's his favorite character in all of comic books, and I always think of him when I think of Captain America. And the fact that it introduced Bucky, he and I talk about it all the time, where we used to when he was still here. And I loved that they picked Sebastian Stan. I didn't know who he was at first. Of course, his portrayal of Winter Soldier, we saw many, many cosplays at Pensacon of Winter Soldier. It's still a look that people want to adopt and want to cosplay as. And it was such a strong trailer. I think that was one of the strongest MCU trailers. Showing him catch the shield was like, oh my God, you got to see the metal arm. And he became a pretty integral part of the movies to come. And, we got to see them in First Avenger as Bucky, and, why, only my friends call me Bucky. All of that stuff. I could break it down scene by scene, but The Winter Soldier was a very impactful movie to the MCU, and it definitely kept the ride going without losing any gas for me. So what about you? What is your number 4?
Well, kind of touching on yours first. I don't have it on my list, and now listening to you talk about it and thinking about it a little bit more, I almost wish I had it on my list.
Cool.
It probably would have been closer to the bottom, to be fair. But things like the elevator scene, that was awesome. It was such a great movie. But at the time when when it came out, I just wasn't a huge Captain America fan, so it just didn't speak much to me. And also that was phase 1, wasn't it? That was before Avengers.
Yes. Actually, I don't know. I think it was phase 2 because phase 1 ended with the Avengers, I believe. I could double check.
Yeah, no, I thought that was pre-Avengers. I could be wrong. Originally Captain America as a character, when I was first getting to the MCU, wasn't that interesting to me. And that was early phase 2, kind of when I was still getting into all these characters. I enjoy them so much more now, but at the time I didn't. So I never was sold on the movie. Now I like it more and more the more I watch it, and I enjoy it more now than I did before. I almost wish I included it on my list. It probably would have been a lot lower down. But now that we have so much more to base it off of, things like I do enjoy Bucky Barnes as a character now. I didn't at the time.
I get that.
I didn't care for him much until like Civil War. And I love him in Falcon and Winter Soldier.
Oh, yeah.
Same thing. They introduced Sam Wilson. I didn't care for him too much then. I mean, he was kind of cool, but like, I didn't love him until now, and I liked him throughout like Civil War as well. And the dynamic between the two of them, Bucky and Falcon.
Oh, yeah, yeah. But can you move your seat?
Especially the series now. And I guess this is a good time to talk about it. It really solidified those two as characters. And I think that, the Winter Soldier was obviously an important starting point to their stories.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Yeah, so I probably would have put it like in the lower half of my list if I included it. I don't know. I'm not going to say what it would replace. I wouldn't really know. I have to kind of reevaluate everything. But since we're here talking about it, Falcon and the Winter Soldier, awesome show.
Oh, incredible.
And
I was asked in a live, real time. The live was shot today, and I was asked which one I preferred, Falcon, Winter Soldier, or WandaVision, and you and I would probably talk for like 40 minutes as to why Falcon Winter Soldier was the better quote unquote show. But
that's another episode.
Yeah, definitely another episode. But yeah, I'm glad that it made you see Winter Soldier in a different light, and that you would have included it in your list had we talked maybe more about it. But that's why we do stuff like this, because
we didn't put as much thought into it. Like if we really sat and analyzed all the movies and built a list, my list would be a little different. I'm sure yours would be the same.
Yeah, of course. I'm actually changing them around as we talk. So yeah, it's definitely the truth. But
that's the first thing I think I would change massively on the list.
So what's your number 4?
Spider-Man: Homecoming.
Oh my
How
Lord.
dare you put that at number 8?
Oh man, I'm such a bad person. But yeah, I'd love to hear why you put it up so high, besides the fact that you're a gigantic Spider-Man fan.
Spider-Man is, I think, the best character in Marvel, period. Not just the MCU, but Marvel. It's definitely the highest collected comic book or the highest amount of issues in my comic book collection. I should say.
Most people, I think.
That's fair. In the comics, I always hated that he wasn't considered an Avenger, at least for most of it. And then in the movie, pretty early on, he's an Avenger. Spider-Man: Homecoming. I kind of touched on it before, how there are things I definitely would have done better. We talked about how awesome Michael Keaton is as a villain, and so I'm not going to get too deep into that. But the big thing is definitely the character development of Tom Holland, and he's kind of got to live up to the Avengers as a superhero. And he wants to go for big things quick. He's like, I want to be an Avenger. I want to do this. I want to do that. He wants to prove himself. And then Tony Stark says, hold on. Friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. Practice, basically.
Right.
And even though, he started off with all this high tech, it was taken away, and he still had to, do what we kind of wanted. He had to figure out on his own and build new gadgets and use his original suit and live up to that power. The movie is has such a powerful message sometimes, like when he's lifting the rocks and he almost gives up and then doesn't,
Right.
Tom Holland, by far, in my opinion, is the best portrayal of Peter Parker / Spider-Man. It's not even close.
I think that's another video too, but
yeah.
I appreciate that because that's something to look forward to. But I like I said, we touched on why Homecoming was so good, and I'm glad that it's on both of our lists. But the fact that it's higher on your list, that's one of the examples as to why I would probably reevaluate where I have it, because I don't think it deserves to be number 8 now that we talk so in depth about all these movies and going back and forth and getting me into the MCU spirit again, because it's been so long since I've watched them. So with that being said, unless you have anything else to touch on.
No, we kind of talked about it a lot, and like I said, we could have a whole episode talking about Spider-Man. That
True.
might be next week, since we were talking so much about it now.
Yeah, I think we have a couple of outlines for Spider-Man.
Maybe for that.
Yeah. All right. So I think we're going to move on to my number 3, and that is Captain America: Civil War.
No way.
Yes.
That's in the same position on my list.
Wow, that's the very first time that's happened so far, so that's interesting. I'm eager to see. I guess we can just flow right into why it's your number 3. So I'll start with a couple of bullet points as why I like it so much, and that's the introduction of Black Panther. That'll make more sense as this video continues, but yeah, or as this podcast continues rather. But yeah, so I really enjoyed Captain America: Civil War because of that, the introduction of Black Panther, the fact that it tied together the conflicts of previous movies, like what ended up happening in Avengers Age of Ultron, which neither one of us seem to really remember or not really want to put that on the list for various reasons. And we can talk about that in, other content, but it did bring back a gigantic plot point from that movie. And that was, the destruction of Sokovia and all that, and why that brought the Sokovia Accords and everything. So that was a big plot of Civil War, obviously. I think that the fact that a lot of videos came out when the movie was announced saying, oh, look, it's like they're going to have to green screen all the other characters from Marvel that were in the actual comic series Civil War that they don't have the rights to, like all of the X-Men and all the Fantastic Four and all these characters. And they did a great job with what they had. I think the conflict was there. It was very believable. It divided the fans. As much as I don't really want to talk about this on this episode, at least, it was like the concept of when the Twilight movies came out, when they were like, oh, Team Edward and Team Jacob, but
it was actually entertaining.
Exactly. So for us, it was like, oh, finally we have like this real world, or a better example would be Freddy versus Jason. When that came out, people were really like, okay, Freddy's going to win or Jason's going to kill him or whatever. And now we got this again with Team Captain, Team Iron Man. And I remember going to the theater and sitting, in the back row and having one of my friends sit in the front row because it was just a madhouse. We couldn't get our seats together. And I'm like, Team Captain. And I yell it and he just yells back, Team Captain or whatever. And then some rando that I didn't meet, but it all in good fun in another row goes, no, Team Iron Man or whatever. And then the movie starts and we're all enjoying it together. So just the memories. I mean, that's a big part. And the fact that Civil War is so action packed and so well done, and you get to see all these characters. It's almost like an Avengers movie that isn't an Avengers movie. Yeah, exactly. So those are some of the reasons why Civil War is on the top for me. There's many other reasons. like just the controversy of the whole concept, the fact that we were all so taken aback by the whole Rhodey thing when Vision shoots him down.
Oh yeah,
all of those moments. It was such a roller coaster of emotions, and it was just such a fun movie. But I want to hear about what you think. Why is it on your top 3?
Well, just a lot like kind of Iron Man and Avengers. This one is there. For many reasons, but one of the biggest reasons is it's another landmark film in the MCU for me. And I think the landmark is, one, it really is what solidified me as now a diehard Marvel fan.
Okay.
If it weren't for this movie, I'm not going to say I wouldn't be, but that movie is definitely what made me, I think, a diehard fan. So, one, it introduced Spider-Man. I have been waiting on a Spider-Man movie or him in the live action for a long time.
A lot of us did, yeah.
Because Tobey Maguire, watched as a kid. It was kind of cheesy. I still watch them. I enjoy them. But it's not like up to par. Andrew Garfield, I liked a lot more when it came out because it was flashy. It looked cool. More I watch it, less I like it. But it's still a fine movie in my opinion. Tom Holland knocked it out of the park. And he shows in and underoos. He jumps in, steals Captain America's shield.
Not very easy to do.
Not easy to do. That was awesome. And, he's clumsy throughout the fight, but he's awesome. And he kind of is awkward, which is it's showing that character when at the time he didn't have a movie. That was his only spotlight. And it still portrayed him as a character so well. It definitely complimented him throughout the film every time he was in a scene, especially when he's fighting Bucky and Sam.
Oh, he's like, wow, you got a metal arm.
Yeah, that was, I think that alone is really what drove it for me. But you put so many big characters on the screen and you evenly balance everybody so much. At the time, I kind of had become more of a Captain America fan, or was right then really being sold on Captain America. I had started like really loving Iron Man at that point, so seeing these people clash, it's hard to pick a team. Again, like politically, you kind of see both sides of it.
Right.
Obviously, you want freedom. It's almost, and I'm not going to try to get too political here. It's almost like saying this is the Republicans and this is the Democrats, but dumbed way down, and saying here's the good sides of both. There are drawbacks to both, but neither of them are inherently wrong. You have, I would say, Cap's more on the Republican side in that he wants more freedom. He wants less government intervention, whereas Iron Man is willing to risk some of his freedom and some of the people's freedom for more safety. And as an idea, obviously, that is not a bad thought. Like, yeah, I want people to be safe. Okay, I can commend that. But I'm not willing to forfeit what is important to me, what is my values, and like important to our safety in a different way, maybe less directly.
It's a very interesting way of looking at it because it's a lot like the Professor Xavier and Magneto outlook, where it's like, by any means necessary, nonviolent. The Martin Luther King and the Malcolm X, and for comic books, for me, that's always been the X-Men with Magneto and Professor X. But I never really looked at it that way with Civil War. So that's interesting because I think regardless of what side, not that this is a political podcast, or episode or anything, but whatever side of the line you lean on, whether it's, conservative or, liberal or whatever, a lot of, if you ask me, both parties have existed this long because there is such a respect, whether they want to admit it or not, within each other, that neither side is completely wrong. And I think that's the point that you were trying to make. And I agree with that because that's why wars begin, because both sides believe they're right. Most wars, I would say. Yeah. Not that I'm a history major or anything, but that's a very interesting point. I didn't really even think about it, let alone say it on this, podcast episode. But I really appreciate that because it makes me want to watch the movie again.
Yeah, and for sure.
Hopefully that's what this episode's making you guys want to do, is watch the MCU again. So
and to kind of streamline my thought on that and kind of make it a little bit shorter. Essentially, Iron Man is willing to forfeit freedom for safety, and then Captain vice versa. He's willing to forfeit, in a way, safety for freedom. And in a perfect world, you just have both. But we're in an imperfect world, and that's what's creating conflict. Right. And realistically, it shows how you have to find compromise, and they don't find compromise.
Right.
They fight, like it doesn't work out for them. And the whole ending was super powerful with Baron Zemo, which is another character that I didn't care for too much until Falcon and Winter Soldier. And now I love him as a villain.
I didn't care about him until the end of Captain America Civil War.
Well, yes, but still.
And it made me want more, which we did.
Yeah, exactly. But his whole timeline towards the end of that, his ending, as far as we were concerned, until Falcon and Winter Soldier, and the whole bit with him, and it was Black Panther that kind of helped him, almost very similar to what happened with him and Killmonger. And then the whole, fight at the end, of course, between Bucky, Cap, and Iron Man, and, two soldiers beating up an orphan.
Essentially.
Yeah. And then, you get where he's coming from. And at that point, it's not even about the politics anymore. It's almost more about revenge for Iron Man. And it's in like the heat of the moment. It's a passionate fight for him because he's like, Bucky killed my parents. He has to answer for that. And then Cap is like, no, that's not the case. He's one, my friend, and I have to defend him. And two, you can't murder him because of what he did a long time ago, especially because he wasn't in control.
Right. And it's not going to bring him back and that whole dynamic. Exactly. Yeah. Well, there's
a lot to talk about with Civil War.
I was just about to say that's probably another episode, but I'm glad that it's something we get to share here. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, number 2 for me.
Hold on, no.
Yeah, because that was the same.
3, yeah. I thought we skipped. I was like, hold on, before we get ahead.
So my runner-up as my favorite MCU movie is probably, you guys can narrow it down. It's either one or the other. It's Thor Ragnarok. That pretty much gives away what number 1 is, but that's okay. Thor Ragnarok for me is number 2, and that's probably one of the easiest ones to talk about, and that's because most people enjoy it for the same reason I do, and that is that Taika Waititi is a master of what he does. I cannot wait for him to, quote, ruin Star Wars. That's something I'm really interested in. I don't know if you heard about that.
He said that. He said, I'm going to ruin Star Wars.
Yeah, and I'm really excited because I love it. I love that he's not only a director, he is a voice actor. He is, a comedic genius. I mean, him and Jojo Rabbit was incredible.
I kind of want to put a hold on a second, and I kind of want to hear your number 1, and I want to say my 2 and 1. And we can elaborate. I think we should do it. So what's your number 1?
It's not a surprise. It's Black Panther.
Oh, so you didn't have Far From Home on your list.
I did not.
Far From Home is my number 2, and my number 1 is Thor Ragnarok.
Interesting.
That's why I wanted to go ahead and say it, because I want to talk about this a lot right now.
Okay.
So, how about this? Let me talk about Homecoming, Black Panther, and then we could both rave about Thor Ragnarok.
That sounds good. So you guys hear it first. Okay. So my number 2 is Thor Ragnarok, and my number 1 is Black Panther. I think it's no guess. Most of you who know me from previous videos know that how high I rank both these movies. And CJ, your number 2 is?
Like I just said, Far From Home.
Yep.
I might have said Homecoming on accident a couple times there, but Far From Home.
And then your number 1 is?
Was Thor Ragnarok.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So, Far From Home, and now looking at it more, it might not be my number 2 anymore, kind of reevaluating. It's still pretty high on there, but I might bump it down a little bit because after talking about Civil War, I got a little more passionate.
Yeah, of course.
I might swap those 2.
Okay.
Far From Home, I think the biggest thing was I saw these elementals. I was like, oh, we're getting like Hydro Man. I didn't know. I think there are heroes for the other 2 elementals that show up in the movie. But I was like, oh, we're getting Hydro Man, right? That's a Marvel character. And, I want a Sinister Six. And like just about every one of Spider-Man's Rogues Gallery has at one point or another been in the Sinister Six.
Right.
So realistically, they could take any 6 Spider-Man villains and throw them in there.
Pretty much.
So from the trailers, I know, or I think at least, Hydro Man's going to be in the movie, and Mysterio is going to be in the movie. We've already seen Scorpion, and we've seen Vulture. Very little Scorpion, but he was in the first movie.
Yeah.
And we saw Prowler. He might show up.
Right.
Yeah. So we're building up a Rogues Gallery, we're building up a Sinister Six, so I was getting super hyped. Now, I was let down on the Sinister Six side, but I was kind of thrown for a loop by the whole, hey, there's no such thing as Hydro Man yet. It's just a water elemental and a flame elemental and a wind elemental or whatever they were. And the whole villain the whole time was Mysterio. Now, Mysterio is a great comic book villain, and I was a little concerned watching the trailers and getting ready for the movie that he may not have been represented the best on the cinematic side. Not because of the actor being Jake Gyllenhaal. That's another thing is I don't think that he represented specifically, what's his real name? Quentin Beck. Quentin Beck, yeah. I don't think he necessarily represented him as accurately as I would have liked, but this version of the character I really love, kind of like what we talked about a few other times. It's almost like a new character for me as far as the Quentin Beck side. I really liked his origin as a villain. It showed him like peppered in a few background scenes with working for Iron Man. That's where he got all this tech, because normally he was like a stagehand or whatever, and he's good with all these special effects for like stage magic. So I really like that different take on it, but still does the same kind of thing. And then, of course, all the effects they used and the mind tricks that he uses on Peter. I just love the way they represented it. And I was very pleasantly surprised with how they represented Mysterio and his effects in the movie.
Yeah, like the fact that they utilize like drones, which is a very real technology. Maybe not to the level in the movie, but we do have drones that could do crazy things. And I, just to touch on that, I didn't know much about Mysterio as apart from the Mysterio in the cartoon and the fact that he was a big part of, you know, Old Man Logan, because that's my favorite graphic novel. And
I didn't know he was part of that.
Oh yeah, huge part of that plot. And I didn't know that that's how they were going to do it in Spider-Man. So still to this day, I don't know his true origin, which I need to research on it, because I didn't know if it was all about illusions. I know that he was using magic and stuff, but I didn't know that it was using technology to deceive like they did in Homecoming. But I did, with all that being said, I did appreciate it. And if I find out that that's not his original origin, then that's fine. But I do still appreciate it for what it was, and the fact that he used real world technology, at least in the MCU, to dupe Spider-Man and dupe Nick Fury, which is not very easy to do because we know how much tech he has and how much he has access to. So that was really interesting. And the fact that they chose Jake Gyllenhaal to bring it to the big screen and bring it to life was masterful. I think it was great. When I saw that trailer, I was like, is he going to upstage Tom Holland? Like, are we going to get another?
Almost did.
Yeah, for real. Because that's what Michael Keaton did for me. To me, Michael Keaton was who I went to go see, you know, Far From Home for, because he was such a good actor in that. Like, Michael Keaton still got it, you know, but that's interesting.
But I definitely love the way they represented the dynamic between the two of them, like when they were actually fighting. And then I've never seen that take on it before, the whole building up to it, all that deception, him trying to befriend Spider-Man and even Nick Fury to dupe all of them, like you said, and gain their trust and to gain access to more technology. And
especially the glasses.
When he started showing those true colors, at first I was like, what are they doing with this movie beforehand? He's a hero this time? I was like, he's fighting actual villains. I didn't even consider the fact that those were going to be illusions because he was doing his own illusions when he was fighting them. So I was like watching the first half of the movie thinking I'm going to be super disappointed, and then was just like blown away by the second half of the movie the first time I watched it.
Yeah.
And then, like I said, the dynamic between him just kind of duping him, and then you never really know the whole movie what's going on. But you know that something is going on that you're not aware
you know
of.
It's something. You just don't know what. Yeah.
And I just appreciate that. I appreciate the way they do it. And if you go back and watch it from the beginning, you could see a few things here and there that suggested it and that you maybe could have guessed if you were like super looking for it the first time. But,
right. Yeah.
So I think it's just a fantastic film. Obviously, Spider-Man's my favorite character, so I get to see that. Mysterio is probably one of my favorite, definitely top 5 Spider-Man villains.
You definitely need to read Old Man Logan if you like Mysterio that much.
Yeah.
Then.
I just never was too much into the X-Men. So it was definitely super cool to see that version of Mysterio in the MCU. They did a perfect job, and he's still around, so he could be part of the Sinister Six with Vulture and Scorpion. Well,
not to obviously discredit my number one, but because we're both going to go on a tirade to end the episode with Thor Ragnarok, I'm going to talk about why Black Panther is my number one. And we talked a lot about Killmonger and how great of a character he is. I'm just so blown away by the fact that we were fortunate enough, obviously Chadwick Boseman was taken way before his time, and we were fortunate enough to get a Black Panther movie with him in it before the tragedy happened. The fact that it was such a beautiful movie to watch. The music, Kendrick Lamar knocked it out the park. The cinematography, the use of the tech, Suri was hilarious. I mean, Okoye, all of them. They were just such good characters that we only knew Black Panther and his dad, and we only got to see his dad in Civil War for maybe 10 minutes, and didn't get anything from Black Panther from his dad, just the fact that he was the king of Wakanda. So it made me believe that Wakanda was a real place. I think the very first time I heard the phrase Wakanda was in Ghostbusters 2.
Oh, was it?
And it wasn't referencing Wakanda from the comics. It was just something that Dan Aykroyd's character says. If memory serves, I'm a big Ghostbusters fan, for those of you that know me, but I'll definitely double check. I believe he says something about Wakanda somethings, but don't quote me on that.
It's been a long time since I've seen Ghostbusters 2, so I don't actually know what you're talking about.
I'm actually, really cool when we stop recording, I want to look it up and see if they say Wakanda, but I'm sure we can find it on the internet. But anyway,
like what kind of
Possibly, because Wakanda's very much a Marvel property. But anyway, I do love how Civil War ended and the fact that it got me super excited for Black Panther, and we knew it was coming.
Oh yeah.
You know, the music, the tribal music, you know, whatever you want to call it, the score, it was just so good.
Oh yeah, that's definitely one thing I left out is I love the score for those movies.
Oh yeah,
or that movie.
Yeah, like the beginning, it felt very much like. Because Black Panther, obviously, they had to change the timeline for most of these movies. Like The Punisher, for example, even though he's not in the MCU, The Punisher took place...
Might be when they...
Might be, yeah. But it took place, if memory serves, during like the Vietnam era. A lot of these movies had to be modernized because, you know, unfortunately, time happens and people die. And, you know, Vietnam is not like... My kids are not really they're going to look at Vietnam the way I looked at World War I or World War II, something I did not live through. You know, even though I didn't live through Vietnam, it was a lot closer to my generation than World War II was. Whereas like the Iraqi-Iran war and all the conflicts that we've had in the last 25 years, my kids are going to see as I saw Vietnam, something that I just missed, but happened relatively not long ago. Yeah. If that makes sense. But anyway, I know that Black Panther in the comic books, I believe... at least one of the comic lines, how they did in the movies where they wanted to keep Wakanda a secret and the technology and all that stuff. In the comics, I believe it was the cure for cancer.
Oh, and might be right, yeah.
And that's something that they were like, well, they don't deserve it. You know, it's not so much the jets and the beads and the armor. It was more of the cure for cancer that the rest of the world doesn't deserve it because they are just destroying each other. Kind of like how the movie began.
Yeah.
And obviously, it got more modernized now, and now it's about the technology, which I'm glad because that's a very controversial subject to say. You know, can't whatever, but
you don't want to withhold the cure for cancer for anybody because that means you're kind of the bad guy.
Yeah.
But changing it to the tech kind of makes it to where they're not really the bad guy. And eventually, at the end of the movie, that great reveal that he says, "Oh no, we're gonna say who we really are."
That was great because it brought everything full circle. It showed that, you know, the what Killmonger fought for was not invalid. It was one of those things where, yes, he had to be humbled down, but I wanted so bad to touch on this when you were talking about it. But the fact that Killmonger, his downfall was the fact that he was bred to be who he was. It was a tragedy, and T'Challa saw it, whereas King T'Chaka did not. He saw it as like, you know, cut off loose ends. It doesn't matter what the intentions were. Whereas T'Challa looked at it as every man is responsible for their own actions, not so much, you know, the spotlight or whatever. And I thought that was so impactful that he almost didn't want to. It was a mercy. But very much so Killmonger, you know, he wasn't stupid. The scene where they introduce him, he knows more about the artifacts than the woman who was curating the museum. Yeah. You know, he knew about vibranium, obviously.
I love that little opening bit.
Exactly. Yeah. And he didn't even go to Wakanda yet. So he knew more about his heritage than someone who was a professional, quote unquote, in that. You know, I love that Andy Serkis was Ulysses Claw. It was really interesting that I got to hear my name, which is a very unique name. I'm the type of person that when I go to a gas station, I don't see my name in a little keychain or a little shot glass. Like I go down and the names stop at like V.
I'm going to find you a shot glass or a keychain that says Ulysses.
I've tried to find things like, you know, little trinkets that have my name on it just to kind of, you know.
It's so hard to find.
It's so hard to find. Yeah. And, So when I heard that, I was like, wait, what? Because I didn't know much about Black Panther either. But I do definitely know now. And I love pretty much everything CJ said about Killmonger. Great character, great music. It was just so I could do a whole podcast about why Black Panther was amazing. But I wanted to get it not out of the way, but I wanted to move on to the ending of the episode, which is us talking about Thor Ragnarok. And I think we've arrived there. So it's my number 2 and CJ's number 1. And I'm going to let CJ start, and then I'll just kind of agree with what he says or maybe even disagree, but I don't think so. And then kind of add elaborate, give my points, and then that'll be the end of the episode. So CJ, take it away.
I actually think it's interesting, and it's not going to be the end. We have a few more things to talk about. We'll kind of go quickly through them. We got some important stuff we left out.
Gotcha.
But we'll go quick. I think it's interesting because he is your favorite character. You know, you'd think that I would have a Spider-Man movie right at number 1, and you would have Thor right number 1. But I get why you didn't, and it's still number 2. And same thing for me. My Spider-Man was still number 2. Thor Ragnarok is what made Thor an interesting character for me.
And that's why it was my number 2.
Exactly, right? So the first 2 Thor movies, the first one was okay. It established who he is, and I think that movie is fine. It's not top 10 worthy in my opinion, but it's a solid movie, and I think it's important that everybody watches it. Thor: The Dark World was a travesty.
I don't remember anything about it except for the fact that Rocket Raccoon reminded me of what the plot was in Endgame.
Yeah,
That's about it.
it's such a forgettable plot. The villain's super forgettable. By the way, it's Malekith, the Dark Elf, who is the main antagonist in the War of the Realms comic book timeline, which is an awesome timeline. He makes an awesome villain, and he's represented completely differently. And if you want to do justice to Malekith and who he is as a character, and Thor even and who he is as a character, I recommend reading the comic book series War of the Realms.
I'm actually somebody who hasn't read that, so I'll check it out as well.
And I got them all. You could borrow them from me.
Sweet.
But Thor Ragnarok.
Yeah.
I watched it almost as an obligation, not knowing what to expect. I'm like, I watch all the MCU movies. I want to watch it, right? And it opened off, and it was actually funny right away. And I was already all in. Like, at that moment, I was good. He's spinning around on a chain.
Super self-aware. Even the way the movie was shot was completely different. If you look at if you look at Mjolnir from Thor and Mjolnir from Ragnarok, it's two completely different props. Like, even that was different.
Yeah.
Like, I remember watching the first one and thinking Thor was pretty much like a Ken doll that was cosplaying as Thor. And then you watch him in Ragnarok, and in Thor 1, he was just like super clean and like just not, it just didn't emphasize the Thor, And then, of course, I didn't get the Thor helmet.
Yeah.
I didn't get any of that.
Kind of got it in Thor Ragnarok.
My point was, you didn't get it till Ragnarok. And the fact that they chose to tackle a comic book that, if it wasn't for Ragnarok, we would have never even seen, which was the Planet Hulk crossover-ish kind of thing that they did.
And generally, looking at Thor as a character, whenever I see him in comic books, I'm not super excited to read about him because he's another super monotone character. He's almost worse than Doctor Strange for me.
Because he's from a different world that he just doesn't identify with humans.
Interesting to me. Now, there's a few timelines where basically him trying to prove himself, like his key parts in the story that I love. But if he's ever an extra party in a comic book, I'm just not sold on it.
Right.
So like War of the Realms, I liked him in it because it was him proving himself. Like, it was more about him than anything else. Of course, it had a ton of MCU characters, or Marvel characters. It was like a big event, like an Infinity War type thing. But he was kind of the focus.
So like the humor in it carried it, definitely. I think
to some degree, yeah.
Yeah, it made for, a fun movie, but also the serious undertones, like, Surtur blowing up freaking Asgard. That's not a joke, but it worked with the comedy. Loki, obviously great. Valkyrie was a very, very good introduction to another strong female character. I think everyone took to her. I think the fact that they showed a lot of her origin in flashbacks, of course, utilizing Odin as, like, I don't want to say a martyr, but like he
in a way, he
essentially
was.
like sparked what was important. The fact that Hela, oh my God,
oh yeah, she's a great villain.
Amazing.
Not a relatable one, but it's just awesome.
Exactly, and
super powerful. It shows that he has to really prove himself.
And even the showing how the cathedral was modeled after, like, deleting history, which is it's a big part of war. The winner of a war decides how history is written, and that's something that was kind of touched on in there, and it worked. It was great. I loved that a lot of the characters were still there, as far as like from the other Thor movies. They made up for, even though they got just decimated.
Yeah, things didn't last long.
They didn't, but it was almost like necessary. And Keith Urban. Or Carl Urban, sorry.
Keith Urban.
Carl Urban. That was a really fun. I mean, I love that scene with him, running, saying, "Wait, I'm supposed to introduce you," and he's just running. Just little subtle humor like that wouldn't really work if it wasn't a director who was comfortable in that realm.
Taika Waititi.
Dude, that man, I love that man.
I'm cold.
Yeah. He's been dead this whole time.
I mean, the big thing is with that movie, it's just they did every character so much justice.
Oh yeah.
We got reintroduced to Hulk, which we, at that time, I want to say we hadn't seen since Age of Ultron.
Right.
And it's like he stuck his Hulk. Okay, he's got his own new complex, right? And it was almost like a vague Planet Hulk. It was an important part for his story, even though he doesn't get his own movies. It almost is a Hulk movie without being a Hulk movie.
and he didn't want to go back, and he found his own, and
Yeah.
they made it their own, because in the comics that's not how it went down, but it still worked.
Yeah, and it was an important part to really show his complexity between Bruce Banner and Hulk, and really what it leads up to in Avengers Infinity War, or Endgame, I guess. So I think that was really cool. Obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, we'll back up a little bit. Loki is Loki. He's got a mischief. He's always screwing people over. But he, in the time of need, when they, he's got to come in clutch. He's got to help out. He is there for his brother.
Yep.
At the end of the day, he might literally stab him in the back. But right before that, he did what was important, and he was there for his brother when he truly needed him.
And we were introduced to Get Help. That was also something
that was
we got
funny.
To see. Yeah, so I mean, the movie was just so well done and so rewatchable. And honestly, you get everything you need to know about Thor from that movie.
Oh, 100%.
I loved it. I loved every bit of it. I loved his look. I loved how he represented himself. I loved that even though he was, in the very beginning of the movie, he was the Thor that we all love, the Thor I love. He still had character development because he lost his hammer. And when I saw that trailer, dude, when
it blew it up. Well, that's kind of, I was kind of rounding my way to it. So, like, first, I guess, is Valkyrie, right? She shows up, she's disgraced Valkyrie, and she finally says, again, in the time of need, I will turn around and help. Essentially, it took a lot of coaxing, obviously, but she did.
Yep. And
she really proved herself and became an awesome character. But the big one, Thor. We were left with an almost two-dimensional character who's constantly, he had to prove his worth to his father again. Well, now they take away his hammer permanently.
Yeah.
Because obviously he gets it back throughout Endgame.
Yeah, because time travel.
Exactly, yeah. But they take it away, so he has to prove himself. He doesn't have a weapon for the rest of that movie.
Right.
It's just him. And I mean, dude, that scene, what were you the god of again? On that bridge. And as soon as they started playing Immigrant Song by Led Zeppelin, which might be the best / most unexpected song for that sequence, has got to be one of my favorite scenes out of all the MCU.
Lyrically, that song is about Valhalla and Norse mythology.
But, that's not it's definitely more popular now since the movie came out.
Of course, 100%.
Like they could have done Thunderstruck, right?
Oh, yeah. Or even awesome Ride the Lightning or something.
Yeah, a ton of different songs. But they went, no, we're going Norse because it's really telling a story. And it was really, this time, as opposed to, the first movie, he wasn't proving himself to somebody else, proving himself worthy to his father. He was proving himself worthy to himself. It was that self-actualization that was super important.
That scene though, too, in that same scene where it was almost like a religious, like a rite almost, when you get to see that I think it's 3 times that it cut zooms into Odin just standing in that field.
That was awesome.
And he was just like, oh crap.
Yeah.
It's now or never, it's do or die. Asgard is not a place, that's a people. That whole thing, dude. Oh my God.
And you also get Hulk again, right?
Yep.
Where now, at this point, he's Bruce Banner. He doesn't know if he'll be able to go back, and he decides to jump in and help and fight that giant wolf. I don't remember what it's called.
Oh, yeah, the dog, yeah.
And then he splats on the bridge.
Oh, dude, and
it was hilarious. But he still came back, and he was a super big player. And then it showed, he has, to some degree, also come to some level of understanding or reasoning with the Hulk.
And purpose, yeah. But I love that. It's so hard for such a tense moment to have such a dialed to 11 instantaneous comedic relief sequence where he literally splats on that Bifrost.
And they can go straight back to the seriousness. It's fantastic.
And he suplexes the dog.
And he does. Dude, I love that bridge scene. It is so good. And even Loki, and he has the 2 knives in his hand. And he has his headdress, whatever you want to call it.
The helmet, yeah.
Yeah. And it for all 4 of those characters, it was just so important. And it just really drove home that end of that story. Yeah. And they moved on to bigger, better things. They moved on to their next, moment, which leads into Infinity War.
And Carl Urban, his when he had almost that Titanic moment where it's women and children first, and he put his hood up and
I forgot about him.
Went to leave and gets on there and he's like, well, Dez and Troy need to help me out. I mean, even though it was a little unrealistic that he had infinite ammo in those 2 M16s, but still,
Well, even that, yeah, I didn't even think about that. You're right, is he also had his own character development. He was a weaker character who took advantage of, basically was willing to blindly follow, almost like a worm tail from Peter Pettigrew.
Exactly, so yeah.
from Harry Potter,
Right.
working for Voldemort under somebody more powerful because he knew it would get him by. Now, he didn't turn around and, redeem himself like Scourge, I think his name is, with Destin's Troy, Carl Urban.
Yeah.
I think his name's Scourge. I can't remember. I know I've read a few comics with him in it. But, how he kind of, redeemed himself at the end in another set of character development. Like I said, it's my favorite movie. And one thing we kind of left out of the list that I'm sure everybody's wondering right now, because we never talked about it at the beginning like we were going to, is we're not putting Infinity War or Endgame on these lists.
Yes.
We skipped that part.
We did skip that part.
And it's almost better because it left that where are they going to put them,
Exactly. And I think exactly, you just took the words out of my mouth. I think that'll be a fitting way to end it, because it makes so much sense that, those movies obviously would be either most people's number one or number two. I've actually heard maybe one or two people say they didn't care for them, but I don't want to waste time talking about that because I think that's just incorrect.
We could literally do a podcast talking about those two movies, and I think we should.
Which is why we should keep it brief.
It's our tier 0. It's above those two things. There's specific scenes that relate to Thor, especially when he came down into Wakanda. That's probably that whole thing from Nidavellir where he's holding the forge open and then makes his way to Wakanda. That's probably my number one scene.
And Bruce Banner's like, you guys are so screwed now.
Yeah. So again, we can talk about that forever. Few not honorable mentions, but other things I think we should just go over real quick. We kind of already talked about WandaVision and Falcon Winter Soldier a little bit. Obviously, those aren't movies, so they're not going to be on the list. I do think that those are super important. I think Falcon Winter Soldier is a lot better and super important. And if it were a movie, it would be in my top 10. Easy.
I agree.
WandaVision would also probably be in there. What about things that we're looking forward to?
I'm actually looking forward to 2 movies off the top of my head that aren't really that we haven't gotten any teasers on, which is obviously Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, and Thor, God and Thunder.
Mm-hmm.
I always think it's Love and Thunder, but it's God and Thunder.
No, I thought it was Love and Thunder.
See, I don't even know.
It is Love and Thunder.
Oh, okay, Love and Thunder. I am not really looking. I don't want to say I'm looking forward to or not looking forward to, because I think some of these movies I don't know enough about because I am just now reading comics that are being utilized. Yeah. As opposed to comics that I just wanted to read on my own. Mm-hmm. So the Eternals, and we talked off camera about that, I'm just waiting to see what they do. Shang-Chi is something else. I'm waiting to see what they do, but I am excited. I think the casting is great. And as far as stuff that we know is coming out, I'm very curious to see how they integrate Blade and like the Fantastic Four and the X-Men. I've made a lot of assumptions into saying that they're probably going to use that part in Infinity War where they talk, or actually in Endgame, where I think it's Endgame. Yeah, I think it's Endgame, where at the very beginning where they're figuring out what the heroes have been doing since the end of the blip, and you hear when Black Widow is having that Star Wars meeting, that's what I call it, when everyone's a hologram, and
like that,
she says, so what's going on your front in Wakanda?
Oh, yeah, the Namor thing.
Yeah, the Namor thing. So I think the Namor thing would bring the Fantastic Four and the X-Men seamlessly into the MCU, but I can talk a lot about that, and I'm sure you guys have thoughts on that as well. We haven't plugged anything, but definitely since this is going to upload on YouTube, let me know in the comments below.
As well.
Yeah. No, I'm just saying,
okay.
As far as that goes,
yeah.
I know that you guys are probably wondering how they're going to integrate that, and I kind of want to remind you guys to let me know in the comments on that, but that's how I feel. That's where I think I just wanted to get mine out of the way, because I think mine is a lot less I don't want to say impactful, but a lot less thought out than yours, because I purposefully, as you guys know, I don't look at trailers. Unless the trailer is a teaser trailer, I don't really look at it because I don't want it to ruin the movie for me.
That's fair.
But I know that you have deeper thoughts, so I just wanted to kind of get mine out of the way.
I actually don't have too much deeper thought on any of these. So I have assumptions about what the next Black Panther movie and the next Thor movie are going to be. And based off of those assumptions, I'm not as confident as maybe I should be on either of those, or I'm not super confident on both those, so I'm just waiting. I wouldn't say that either of those two are the ones that I'm like, I can't wait till these come out. Obviously, Black Panther is going to be more of like the Namor thing. Thor, Love and Thunder, I'm kind of concerned that Thor might not even be in the movie.
Why is that?
So in the comics, there's Thor comics that Thor isn't in because Jane Foster takes the helm of Thor, and she is just Thor.
Oh.
Yeah, she becomes worthy. She carries it, and she's struggling with, I want to say it's cancer. like or leukemia or something like that. And whenever she, you know, possesses the power of Thor, she kind of transforms a little bit, and it heals her of everything. So she can't die from the cancer while she is in that form. But the other side of that is if she's in the middle of chemotherapy, that Asgardian magic flushes all that out of her system. So anytime she transforms, she has to start all the way over.
Oh wow,
so
that's
it's
tragic.
exactly. It's tough to watch. In War of the Realms, it takes place kind of after she beats cancer, in that timeline at least, and she becomes a different kind of hero. But that's the conflict is, you know, obviously she has to save people, and she's putting other people above herself. So she's willing to take that risk and say, okay, I'm starting all over. I'm going to keep struggling with cancer to save other people, and then possess the power of Thor. But she can't do it all the time because it's kind of not her personality. It kind of changes her personality, almost like Launch. It's like a different person.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So she struggles with that. And then on the other side, obviously, a lot of the time in the comics she spends as Jane Foster struggling with like day-to-day issues. And my assumption, especially since they, you know, reintroduced Jane Foster to the MCU through like I want to say you saw her just a little bit in Endgame.
Yeah.
I think that they're just going to use that as Thor, and that's my concern, especially because Thor is now with the the Guardians of the Galaxy, and I think that they're just going to use him in the Guardians movie.
That's interesting. That's interesting. I cannot wait to see what they do with it, but I never knew that storyline, so I'm actually super interested now as to which way they go with it. So
I want to say they already said that she's going to be. Sorry, I want to say that they already said that she's going to be in that movie, and so
I think she's in the movie poster, so that makes a lot of sense.
We'll see.
That's interesting. That's interesting.
Other things, definitely not Black Widow. Not because I really dislike her that much, but just because her story's been told. I don't think it's necessary to give her a more backstory.
I definitely understand.
And whoever designed the wardrobe for Taskmaster needs to be fired because that is not my Taskmaster, period. And that's all I'm going to say about that right now. The Marvels, super excited for it. Whatever about, you know, Brie Larson and Carol Danvers, but I'm more excited because I think that Kamal Khan's going to be in it.
I think that's what they're doing, and I'm super excited.
They're doing the TV show, so I'm super excited about that as well. Shang-Chi. My big thing with that is I feel like it's going to be a lot like a new, very relevant entry into the MCU for me. It's a character that I don't really know a lot about, so I'm not going to read too much about him. I'm going to just take the movie from what it is. You know, from the trailer alone, I'm sold. I'm ready. I want to see the movie.
I do want to see it. I love how they did that trailer. I did a reaction on my YouTube channel that you can check out of that Phase 4 trailer. Basically,
I was there for that one, right?
Yeah. I think you were.
Yeah.
And I loved it. I loved how they did the trailer. I love the homage to Stan Lee in the very beginning. It was so good. But yeah, unless we have anything else, I think that's gonna cover it for this.
Obviously, I still want to see Spider-Man No Way Home. That kind of goes without saying. I'm kind of expecting a Sinister Six now that we're getting Doc Ock and Jamie Foxx. That's like at the top of my list. That is the #1 movie I cannot wait for. And then seeing all 3 Spider-Men come together.
That's what I'm waiting for. And I'm trying to keep my emotions in check because
I'm setting my bar way too high already.
I just don't want to be disappointed. I'm sure most Spider-Man fans most Spider-Man fans don't want to be. But yeah, that's I know that's all I have for today.
Doctor Strange, Multiverse of Madness.
There's so many movies, dude. Like we could literally talk about this forever.
Got to see that movie. The kind of ending, if you haven't watched it, spoiler alert, of WandaVision, the ending of WandaVision where she has opened the Darkhold and basically says, we're going to the Multiverse of Madness. I'm thinking we're going to get, that's going to kind of show how the whole Spider-Man multiverse goes. I'm hoping we see Mephisto because that was the biggest disappointment for me in WandaVision is not seeing Mephisto. That and they used Evan Peters as Quicksilver, but he wasn't Quicksilver. He was just a dick joke.
Yeah.
Why'd they do that to me?
I have no idea.
I literally, when they showed Evan Peters on that show, I stood up and started pacing for like 15 minutes. I couldn't handle it.
I was so upset that when we were filming WandaVision, I know I filmed a couple of the episodes. I was so upset that I didn't film that episode because I saw it and I was like, oh my God.
Oh, dude.
I lost it, dude.
I don't know. I kind of wish I was filmed for that. I was actually in Japan when that came out, so I wasn't, I wouldn't have been available for that,
right?
Unfortunately, but that would have been awesome. So, I mean, yeah, I keep extending it. That's the last thing I actually have to talk about for Marvel content.
Well, I think this has been a great episode 1. I know we're still trying to get our feet wet. It may not seem super polished yet, but apologies for that. If you're watching on YouTube, I'm going to try I know it's going on YouTube, but I'm going to try very, very hard to actually kick episode 1 out to different podcast mediums where you're just going to hear the audio of the podcast, because that's what a podcast is, I guess, at least a big part of it. And I'm trying to get it all worked out and ironed out and make sure the equipment's working fine and everything. So definitely bear with us in the first couple episodes. Hopefully you enjoyed it. On YouTube, if you're watching this on YouTube, please consider subscribing if you're not already a subscriber, if this is the kind of content you like. We appreciate the likes and the follows and everything. So please remember to give a thumbs up if you enjoyed the content, and definitely drop a like or a comment asking or commenting on what we talked about, your thoughts, your concerns. Do you agree with what our list was? Do you not agree with what it was?
I don't even agree with it anymore.
Is there something you'd change? Is there something you'd add? I'd love to hear it. Load the comments. I love reading comments, and definitely leave a question. That's something that we wanted to touch on. So the beginning of each podcast going forward, we would like to address, select questions, maybe pick 3 questions out of the previous episode of what you'd like for us to just answer in the very beginning of the podcast. And that'll be how we kick it off. I think that's a cool way of engaging.
Yeah. And suggest topics for future podcasts.
Definitely. Because we would love to hear what you guys would like us to talk about, because you're listening to us for an hour and 40-ish minutes.
Yeah. Top 10 DC movies, they're all garbage. Done.
So yeah, thank you guys so much for tuning in. Hopefully you enjoyed it. And those of you who made it to the very end of the podcast, we really appreciate it. This has been episode 1 of Where Nerds Play, and there's a lot more where this came from. So definitely stay tuned, and thank you so much for the support. My patrons, I love you. If you want to be a Patreon supporter, definitely look at the link that I'm going to put in the YouTube video of this podcast episode. And thank you guys so much. I love you guys, and see you in the next episode.
Take care.
Take it easy.